Greetings. My name is Michael Smith, and I come before you today with an important message for all Americans, especially for those who profess faith in Jesus Christ and preach in His name. I'd like to begin by giving you a scenario of what my life is all about. First off, I'm 46 years old, I'm a married father of 2, and I live in a suburb just north of Atlanta. I am also a Christian minister, having dedicated the last 30 years of my life to Christ and His service in one form or another. I've been a youth pastor, an associate pastor, an itinerant minister, and a senior pastor. Presently, I serve as a pastor to other pastors, providing covering, counseling, and encouragement to men and women in ministry across the globe. And though some may dispute this claim after hearing my message, it's my sincere faith in the teachings of Jesus Christ that has prompted me to speak this message to you on this very special day. I pray that you will hear His voice behind my clumsy words. I am an American, a citizen of goodwill who believes in the ideals upon which our country was founded. I hold to these ideals despite the immoral, inequitable, and hypocritical ways they've been misused and misapplied since our earliest days as a nation. While I make no attempt to whitewash or minimize the disgusting or disheartening footnotes of our national story, I do solicit the thoughtful consideration of other citizens like myself who still believe in what America could be. The founding philosophy of our nation is that all human beings are born free and divinely imbued with a right to self-determination, and that in the exercise of that right, they are at liberty to band together for the purpose of self-government, to unify their energies and resources for the preservation of shared values and the pursuit of common prosperity. Central to the health and function of our nation is our collective persuasion that the power a government exerts over its citizens must be derived from, administered by, and implemented for the benefit of those same citizens. In short, there can be no legitimate authority or law in our nation beyond what we, the citizenry, establish for ourselves. To carry out this vision, our founders and framers formed a representative government, the mechanism by which free individuals could negotiate and articulate their shared values, translate those values into laws, establish offices and agencies to uphold those values and laws, and elect officials to oversee and enforce them. Taken together, these offices, agencies, and officials comprise the state, or what we commonly refer to as the government. Because the state exists solely to carry out the democratically expressed will of its citizens, no agent thereof is ever permitted to operate in his or her own interests, or in the interests of the state itself, except as provided by the collective consent of us, the governed. Contrary to popular sentiment, healthy democracies are not built on laws and law enforcement, but upon the equitable goodwill of their freedom-minded citizens, those whose thoughtful reverence for human rights compels them to check and challenge undue encroachment upon those rights by the state. In this light, the laws by which citizens are governed must be morally derived, rationally implemented, and equitably enforced. Because of their human frailty, many of our framers and founders were misguided and mistaken in this endeavor, falling woefully short of God's vision for humanity, creating years and sometimes centuries of inequity and injustice. Whenever our nation has persisted in enacting or enforcing laws contrary to the tenets of freedom and dignity, it has fallen to citizens of goodwill to denounce those laws and demand change. For this reason, each generation of Americans has the responsibility to reevaluate and reconsider our existing laws, to assure that each and every statute fulfills and satisfies God's moral, rational, and equitable standard. This has never been, nor can it ever be, a one-time endeavor. It's an ongoing and ever-unfolding enterprise by which freedom-minded individuals strive together to create a more just and verdant world. This mandate, to advance the cause of justice within every human sphere, is spelled out clearly in the law and the prophets, confirmed emphatically by John the Baptizer, revealed entirely by Christ in the Synoptic Gospels, and championed universally across the apostolic record. For any Christian to conclude otherwise is to fundamentally misread and misunderstand the fullness of Christ's preaching and purpose, an error that breeds blindness of the lowest order, a sightlessness by which men and women over the century have overlooked self-evident truths, often to the detriment of the weakest and most vulnerable among us. And so, on today, Monday, April 20th, 2020, a high day for many in our nation and around the world, I exercise my rights as a citizen of goodwill and use my office as a minister of Christ to propose and call for the full and complete decriminalization, legalization, and regulation of marijuana and related substances at the federal, state, and local levels. And now herewith, I humbly present my 420 proposal in hopes that it may serve as a high-altitude roadmap to lead our nation forward in this important endeavor. It's time for Congress to act. Lawmakers at the federal level must immediately convene a multi-partisan think tank to study various models of legalization and regulation from around our nation and across the world. While no model is perfect, this assembly of freedom-focused lawmakers should translate their findings into a cohesive, holistic, and equitable piece of legislation and aim to put a bill before Congress that can be signed into law on April 20th, 2021. These congressional efforts should be collaborative and inclusive, including stakeholders from the public and private sector that can present their views and make recommendations, but never allowing private interest to supplant the public welfare. Retail and advertisement policy should be highly restrictive and controlled, taking great care to protect underage and vulnerable populations from improper targeting, and providing wide-ranging, substantive recourse for the punishment of violators. While various financial and taxation models should be explored, only conservative projections should be entertained. The objective of legalization is to support individual freedom, not to empower economic exploitation and opportunity. In light of this, options for state-run and nonprofit wholesale and retail operations should remain on the table throughout these deliberations. All government revenues from the sale of marijuana and other regulated substances should be reinvested in drug education, abuse prevention, addiction recovery, and equitable enforcement of applicable laws. Number 2, don't be distracted by the possibilities. Marijuana and related substances may be good for us, having medicinal and therapeutic benefits we've yet to tap on a large scale. Though some recent studies have shown promise, more research is still needed. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if weed proves to be good for us or not. Legalization is still the right choice. Marijuana and related substances may be bad for us, having harmful and addictive properties we're yet unaware of. This may also be true, and we may one day discover that weed is as damaging to our bodies and brains as alcohol, tobacco, refined sugar, processed foods, or even opioids. Still, legalization and regulation are less bad than our current national course. Homelessness may increase in connection with legalization. While there is anecdotal evidence to support this possibility, substance abuse is rarely shown to be a primary cause of indigence. Poverty within a prosperous society is driven by a broad mixture of socioeconomic factors, and though drug use is a common correlative and an easy scapegoat, it's also an oversimplified answer to a deeper systemic question. Legalization may cause crime rates to go down and property values to rise. We have no way of knowing for sure, but ultimately this is a non-factor. Our motivation to legalize should be rooted in our firm commitment to individual freedom and our joint belief that no citizen should be fined, detained, or incarcerated for immoral, irrational, or inequitable reasons. Legalization may bring a financial windfall to local economies. While this may or may not prove true, we must accept that living in a free society is often a messy affair, one that sometimes requires productive citizens to carry the weight of those who, for one reason or another, struggle to manage their own lives. I highly suspect that any surplus revenue that flows into public coffers from legalization will rapidly go up in smoke as we endeavor to care more completely for the most vulnerable in our land. It is a reasonable price to pay. Number 3, prepare for unfortunate realities. After legalization, more people will use and abuse marijuana and related substances than before, and that's okay. Through proper regulation, education, healthcare, and harm reduction strategies, we'll eventually reduce the rates of misuse to an acceptable level, the lowest possible in a free society. After legalization, reports of physical and psychological distress from the overuse of marijuana will also increase. Green and even long-time users may suddenly find themselves thrust into a multi-year learning curve, experiencing and enjoying their newfound freedom in unfamiliar ways. Emergency room visits will see an uptick, complaints of anxiety and mental disorders will rise, and cases of physical dependence will grow. But the scope and scale of these disappointing side effects will be far less than those brought on by alcohol, and it is my earnest hope that an increase in the responsible use of marijuana will trigger a marked decrease in the abuse of alcohol and other substances. After legalization, more intoxicated drivers will unfortunately make their way onto our public roadways, risking their lives and the lives of others irresponsibly and unnecessarily. This is a reality, one which requires an all-hands-on-deck approach to address. Together, we must devise effective and fair-minded methods to prevent, police, and prosecute this and other crimes against the public trust, safety, and welfare. After legalization, the war on drugs will continue, but our resources and energy will be redirected to other areas of the battle, to frontline issues like systemic inequity, predatory sales and trafficking, public health and education, and community revitalization. The downsides of legalization will be felt disproportionately among poor and minority communities. Sadly, we still live in a nation where those terms can be used interchangeably. And as I've contemplated the moral aspects of this issue, my primary objection to legalization has always been how it might affect many of our black, brown, and poor citizens. In the end, I realized the very communities I'd sought to protect from the dangers of legalization had long been ill-affected by the burdens of criminalization. And while every citizen of goodwill should continue to push for a fully realized dignity and equality for all Americans, we must not overlook this critical but imperfect next step. And number 4, why we must legalize anyway. Because laws that subject citizens who responsibly consume marijuana to criminal prosecution are immoral. Because legislating and regulating marijuana and alcohol by different standards is irrational. Because law enforcement ought not be tasked with policing or enforcing unjust laws, nor should they be unduly empowered to trample upon the rights of citizens under the pretense of those same laws. Because there are no perfect solutions to social problems in a free society, only more just and more rational ways of dealing with them. And finally, because it is high time for this insanity to stop. As with the end of Prohibition, it will take a generation or longer to completely weed out bad actors from the illegal drug trade, and to fine-tune our policies to both ensure personal freedom and preserve the public good. The longer we put off our shaky start, the longer we delay our more stable future. Before I close, I wish to offer a few parting thoughts to my fellow Christians. Please know that while I share your conviction that all government should be established upon a theological foundation, I'm also persuaded by Scripture that the administration thereof should be secular in nature. True religious expression cannot exist wherever it is compelled, and the New Testament offers no support for using the authority of the state to coerce or enforce our Christ-specific convictions upon non-believers. It teaches quite the opposite, in fact. Like you, it grieves me to consider that legalizing marijuana may bolster and buttress the distressing spiritual emptiness that's so pervasive in our society, that more people than ever before might seek solace in empty substances rather than the light that comes from God's love. While I hear your hearts and share your concerns, I also realize the same could be said of alcohol, money, sex, power, success, and other earthly pursuits, each of which can deceive and ensnare those who are spiritually vulnerable. As an heir of multi-generational alcoholism, I'm certainly not advocating for widespread use and abuse of drugs and other substances. I'm simply pushing for a more biblical, justice-based approach to a complex problem in our fallen and broken world. Today, I'm asking each of you to consider the New Testament more carefully and to reflect on its broader meaning and application for non-Christians, to see it in a purer light than was passed down to us by our forebears. I hope that despite your initial reservations, to which I can definitely relate, you'll eventually join me in this and other Christ-honoring missions for justice. And finally, I call upon Americans of all faiths, and even those of no faith, to champion this just cause by using your voice and your vote to advance the 420 proposal at the local, state, and federal levels. You can download a copy of the proposal as well as a transcript of this message at michaelandconnie.com. I thank you all for hearing my heart today. I speak peace on you and yours as we navigate this trying time in our nation and around the world. And in Christ's love, I wish you a safe and happy 420 and a glorious rest of your week.